The groom dropped the ring and laughed in her face. "You're too thick to be my bride," he sneered, leaving her humiliated in front of hundreds. But before she could run, the city's most feared mafia boss walked down the aisle, picked up the ring, and claimed her as his own. If you want to see how a rejected woman became the queen of the underworld, hit the subscribe button now. This is a story of revenge you won't want to miss. Everyone in the church held their breath as the groom, Marcus, dropped the wedding ring. He didn't drop it because he was nervous. He dropped it because he was disgusted. He looked at his bride, Clara, and didn't see the woman who had supported him for 3 years. He only saw her weight. In front of 500 people, he grabbed the microphone and said, "I can't do this. You're too thick. You're an embarrassment to my reputation." He walked out, leaving Clara standing alone in a dress that now felt like a cage. The silence in the cathedral was deafening. Clara felt the hot sting of tears, but she refused to let them fall. She looked at her parents, who looked away in shame, more worried about the gossip than their daughter's broken heart. The guests began to whisper, their phones coming out to record her humiliation. She was the fat bride who got dumped at the altar. She felt like the floor should open up and swallow her whole. Just as Clara turned to run, the heavy oak doors of the church slammed open. A man in a charcoal suit walked in with the kind of confidence that made the air feel thin. This was Silas Vane. People didn't speak his name out loud in this city. They only whispered it. He was the man who owned the docks, the banks, and the shadows. He walked straight past the gasping guests, his eyes locked onto Clara. Silas didn't look at Clara with pity. He looked at her with a hunger that terrified her. He reached the altar and picked up the diamond ring Marcus had discarded on the floor. He didn't say a word to the priest. He simply took Clara's trembling hand. His touch was cold, but his eyes were like a fire. "He's a boy who plays with toys," Silas said, his voice a low growl. "I am a man who knows the value of gold." He slipped the ring onto her finger, but it wasn't the wedding band. It was his own signet ring, heavy and marked with a crest. The room went dead silent. By placing that ring on her, he was claiming her under the protection of his family. It wasn't a marriage proposal, it was an acquisition. He leaned in close to her ear and whispered, "If you stay here, they will laugh. If you come with me, they will tremble." Clara looked at the door where Marcus had vanished, then at the man standing before her. She didn't know Silas Vane, but she knew she had nothing left to lose. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and tucked her hand into his arm. As they walked down the aisle together, the guests didn't laugh. They moved out of the way, bowing their heads in fear. They reached the black SUV waiting outside. Silas opened the door for her, a gesture Marcus had never bothered with. As the car sped away, Clara looked back at the church. She realized her old life was over. She wasn't just a rejected bride anymore. She was now under the wing of the most dangerous man in the state, and the real trouble was only just beginning. Life at the Vane estate was a shock to Clara's system. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Silas didn't put her in a guest room. He gave her a suite that took up an entire floor. There were no mirrors in the rooms. When she asked why, Silas told her, "You don't need a piece of glass to tell you who you are. I will tell you." He was stern and distant, but he provided everything she had ever been denied. Every morning, a team of chefs prepared meals for her. For years, Marcus had forced her to eat nothing but salads, shaming every bite she took. But Silas's chefs brought her steak, rich pastas, and fresh bread. When she tried to push the plate away, Silas sat across from her. "Eat," he commanded. "A queen needs her strength, and I like every inch of you exactly as it is." It was the first time a man had looked at her body without wanting to change it. But the safety came with a price. Clara quickly realized Silas was at war. Men with guns patrolled the perimeter. One night, a window shattered in the library while she was reading. Silas was over her in a second, shielding her body with his own. He didn't check himself for glass, he only checked her. The intensity in his eyes wasn't just protective, it was possessive. He wasn't just keeping her safe, he was keeping her for himself. Marcus, the ex-fiancé, wasn't gone. He started calling the estate, begging to talk to Clara. It turned out that the business deal Marcus was counting on had fallen through because Silas Vane had bought the company. Marcus realized he had made a mistake, not because he loved Clara, but because he realized she was now his ticket to power. He told the press that Silas had kidnapped her, trying to spark a public outcry. Silas showed Clara the news reports. He gave her a choice. "The gates are open," he said. "You can go back to him. You can be the wife of a man who hates your shape but loves your father's connections. Or you can stay here and learn what it means to be truly powerful." Clara looked at the gate and then at Silas. She walked over to him and closed the office door. She chose the monster she knew over the man who had betrayed her. To prove her loyalty, Silas took her to a high-stakes gala. He bought her a dress made of deep emerald silk that hugged every curve. When they walked in, the room stopped. Marcus was there, looking smug, until he saw Clara. She looked radiant, her head held high. When Marcus tried to approach her, Silas's guard stepped in. Silas leaned over to Marcus and whispered something that turned the younger man's face white. That night, as they drove back, the tension between Clara and Silas reached a breaking point. They weren't just protector and protected anymore. There was a pull between them that felt like a magnet. But just as Silas reached out to touch her cheek, the car was rammed from the side. A heavy truck sent them spinning off the road. The last thing Clara saw was Silas pulling a pistol from his holster before the world went black. Clara woke up in a dim basement, her head throbbing. She wasn't at the estate. She was tied to a chair in a cold, damp warehouse. Across from her sat Marcus. He didn't look like the polished businessman anymore. He looked desperate and erratic. He told her that Silas Vane was dead and that she was his only way to get the money he needed to pay off his debts. He insulted her weight again, calling her a heavy burden he had to carry. But Clara didn't cry this time. She looked Marcus in the eye and laughed. She realized that Marcus was the weak one. He needed her to feel small so he could feel big. She told him that Silas wasn't dead because men like Silas didn't die easily. Marcus hit her, but Clara didn't flinch. She felt a new strength growing inside her, a strength Silas had planted by treating her like she mattered. Back at the estate, Silas was very much alive, and he was a man transformed by rage. He had survived the crash with only a few broken ribs. He didn't call the police, he called his soldiers. He tore the city apart looking for Clara. He didn't care about the laws or the headlines. He burned down 2 of Marcus's warehouses just to send a message. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was a hurricane. In the basement, Marcus grew more afraid as his phone kept ringing with bad news. He realized Silas was closing in. In a fit of panic, he pointed a gun at Clara. He told her if he couldn't have his old life back, he would make sure Silas lost everything too. Clara stayed calm. She started talking to Marcus, distracting him, using the manipulation tactics she'd watched Silas use. She played on Marcus's ego until he lowered the guard. Suddenly, the wall of the warehouse literally exploded. Silas didn't walk through the door. He came through the ruins. He didn't wait for a standoff. He moved with a speed that didn't seem human. He disarmed Marcus in a blur of motion, breaking the man's arm in the process. Silas didn't kill him, though. He threw him to the floor at Clara's feet. "He's yours," Silas said, his voice dripping with venom. "Decide his fate." Clara looked down at the man who had humiliated her at the altar. She could have told Silas to end him, but she realized Marcus wasn't worth the blood. She told Silas to let him live so he could watch them be happy while he rotted in poverty. Silas smiled, a real, genuine smile. He untied her and carried her out of the wreckage. He didn't care about the cameras or the police sirens in the distance. When they got home, Silas stayed by her bedside all night. He didn't try to be the boss. He told her about his childhood, about how he had been an outcast too. He confessed that he hadn't gone to the church that day to save her. He had gone because he had been watching her for months, admiring her spirit from afar. He loved her long before Marcus dumped her. The twist was that Silas had orchestrated the business failure that made Marcus desperate in the first place. The peace didn't last. Silas's rivals saw his devotion to Clara as a weakness. They figured if they couldn't hit Silas, they would hit the woman he loved. A rival family, the Morettis, sent an assassin into the estate. Clara was in the garden when it happened. She didn't panic. She remembered the basic self-defense Silas had insisted she learn. She managed to trigger the alarm and hide in a reinforced panic room. Silas was halfway across town when the alert hit his phone. He drove like a madman to get back to her. When he found her safe in the panic room, he didn't just hug her. He shook with a fear she had never seen in him. He realized that as long as he was the Mafia boss, Clara would always be a target. For the first time, he considered walking away from the empire he had built. Clara saw his hesitation. She told him she didn't want him to quit. She wanted to help him lead. She started attending meetings with him, sitting at the head of the table. The other men laughed at first, seeing a thick woman in a seat of power. But Clara was smarter than all of them. She found the financial leaks in their businesses that they had missed for years. She became the accountant of the underworld. The Morettis tried one last play. They kidnapped Clara's parents, the same parents who had turned their backs on her at the wedding. They expected Clara to crumble. Instead, Clara took charge. While Silas prepared for a full-scale war, Clara found a different way. She used her knowledge of the Moretti family's secret offshore accounts, information she'd uncovered, to bankrupted them overnight. When Silas found out what she'd done, he was stunned. She had ended a war without firing a single bullet. He realized he hadn't just found a wife. He had found a partner. Her parents were released, and for the first time, they looked at their daughter with genuine respect and a lot of fear. Clara didn't welcome them back with open arms. She gave them a check and told them never to contact her again. But a new twist emerged. A detective named Miller had been building a case against Silas for years. He approached Clara in secret. He showed her evidence that Silas's father was the one responsible for her own grandfather's mysterious death years ago. He told her that Silas knew this and that his rescue at the church was just a way to ease his family's guilt. Clara felt the world tilt. She looked at the documents. They looked real. She had to decide if the man she loved was a savior or a liar. She didn't confront Silas immediately. She played the part of the loyal wife, but she started digging into the Vane family history on her own. She discovered a secret safe in the basement that Silas had told her never to touch. Clara opened the safe and found the truth. The detective had lied. The documents were forged. Silas's father hadn't killed her grandfather. He had actually tried to save him. The detective was working for the last remnants of Marcus's family, trying to tear Clara and Silas apart from the inside. Clara realized the trap was being set for Silas to be arrested that very night. She didn't have time to call him. She went to the meeting spot the detective had arranged, wearing a wire. She got the detective to admit on tape that he was framing Silas and that Marcus was the one funding the whole operation. Just as the detective realized he'd been played, Silas's men surrounded the building. They hadn't been far behind. Silas had never stopped protecting her. The detective was handed over to the real authorities with the recording. Marcus was finally picked up for conspiracy and fraud. The threat was finally gone. But the biggest challenge remained. Silas took Clara to the same church where she had been abandoned. It was empty now, filled only with the scent of lilies and the glow of candlelight. Silas stood at the altar, but this time, he wasn't wearing a gun. He was wearing a simple black suit. He got down on one knee. "I didn't take you that day because of guilt," he said. "I took you because you are the only beautiful thing in a world full of ugly people. I don't want to be your boss or your protector anymore. I want to be your husband." Clara looked at him, no longer the broken girl who felt too thick for love. She felt powerful, beautiful, and loved. She said yes. They didn't have a big gala. They had a private ceremony with just the two of them. When the priest asked if anyone objected, Silas looked at the empty pews and said, they wouldn't dare. The final twist happened as they were leaving for their honeymoon. A letter arrived from a lawyer. It turned out Clara's grandfather had left a massive fortune that was only accessible once she married into a specific bloodline, the Vane bloodline. Silas had known this all along, but he had kept it a secret so she would never feel like he was with her for the money. He had already signed his half of the fortune over to her. They drove off into the sunset, not as a mafia boss and his prize, but as two people who had found light in the darkest places. Clara looked in the rearview mirror and finally saw herself the way Silas saw her, a queen. Marcus was in a prison cell, and Clara was on her way to a new life where her weight was never a burden, but part of the woman who conquered the underworld. 1 year after the wedding, the world believed Clara was just a trophy wife living behind high walls. They were wrong. While Silas handled the iron-fisted side of the business, Clara became the brain of the operation. She turned their dirty money into a legitimate empire of hospitals and schools for the forgotten. She didn't hide her body anymore. She wore custom-made power suits that commanded every room she entered. She had become the great lady of the city, and even the toughest soldiers bowed when she walked by. The peace was shattered when an old ghost returned. Marcus, having served a short sentence, had joined forces with an international cartel that wanted to move into Silas's territory. They didn't target the docks or the warehouses this time. They targeted the one thing Clara loved most, the orphanage she had built for girls who had been cast aside by their families. They took the children hostage, demanding Silas hand over his entire territory in exchange for their lives. Silas wanted to go in with guns blazing, but Clara stopped him. She knew that a bloodbath would destroy the reputation they had built. She told Silas to stay back and let her handle the negotiation. Silas was terrified, but he finally understood that Clara wasn't someone to be protected. She was his equal. He gave her his signet ring for luck and watched as she walked into the lion's den alone, carrying nothing but a briefcase. Inside the orphanage, Marcus was waiting, looking haggard and crazed. He laughed when he saw Clara, mocking her for thinking she had any power. He told her that his new partners didn't care about Mafia honor and were going to kill everyone anyway. But Clara didn't look at the guns pointed at her. She opened the briefcase. It wasn't filled with money. It was filled with files proving that the cartel's own leaders were being embezzled by Marcus. Clara hadn't just come to talk. She had used the last hour to hack the cartel's private servers. She showed the guards, who were cartel mercenaries, that Marcus had set them up to take the fall for a police raid that was coming in 5 minutes. The guards turned their weapons on Marcus instantly. In his greed, Marcus had betrayed the only people standing between him and Silas. He fell to his knees, begging Clara for mercy the same way she had once begged him for love. Clara didn't give him mercy, but she didn't kill him either. She signaled the police, who she had tipped off earlier. As the sirens wailed, she walked the children out to safety one by one. When Marcus tried to run, he was tackled by the very guards he thought he controlled. He was hauled away in chains, this time for life, knowing that the woman he called too thick had outsmarted the most dangerous men in the world. That night, on the balcony of their estate, Silas and Clara watched the city lights. Silas handed her a glass of sparkling cider and touched her stomach. The final twist was a secret they hadn't told anyone yet. Clara was pregnant. The Vane legacy wasn't just going to be about power and shadows. It was going to be about a new generation built on the strength Clara had found in herself. The story ended not with a fight, but with a promise. Silas promised that their child would grow up in a world where they were valued for their heart, not their appearance. Clara looked at her reflection in the window and finally smiled. She wasn't just the woman the Mafia boss took. She was the woman who had taken his world and made it better. The thick bride was now the most powerful woman in the country, and she was just getting started.